Hi, I'm Kathy from Eclectic Images and welcome to Getting Started in Stamping. In this video I'm going to be going over the basic techniques of how you stamp, a little bit of overview of different ink types, different colouring methods, just to get you started in this wonderful hobby. It's a hobby that we love because it's easy to get started and yet you never get bored because there's always new things that you can be using and different ways that you can be using the products that you've got. You can also use a lot of colouring mediums in particular that you've already got. So it's actually quite an economical hobby to get started in. So let's just talk about a little bit about just some of the different sort of things that you can do with stamps. You can stamp onto cards, you can stamp onto scrapbook papers, journals, mixed media projects, even stamp with paint onto your walls. In fact, I like to joke that you can stamp on anything that stands still long enough. But usually we're stamping onto something to do with paper. So I'm just going to show you a few samples. So stamping can be quite simple and clean lines. Here we've just stamped an image and we've just done a little bit of shading. We've then layered it up on some different colours of cardstock. I've actually run one of these layers through an embossing machine with an embossing folder that gives it a textured finish. We've put a bit of ribbon through there and that makes a really clean, simple card. But you can also make your own background papers with your stamps. So something like this, where we've stamped in these earthy tones with our quilt set, and we've stamped a background there with our saying on it. But then we've also made this background card by applying the same ink colours to paper and then stamping a texture stamp over the top. This one here, we've created a grunge effect by only partially inking some of our stamps. Again, we've pounced some ink on there and that's made a lovely colourful background to go behind our sentiment stamp that we've popped on there. Here's one where we've made our background piece with the same stamp. So this is where the stamped image has been stamped and coloured and cut out, and then we've stamped it in a lighter colour to create the background and layered our other images onto it. And we've shaded a bit down the edges of this one, and I'll show you a little bit later about how to do that. You can also add things like glitters and pearls and things to create lovely accents for your stamps. You can use just part of a stamp to create a background effect. And you can also stamp onto your patterned papers. So here we've actually stamped the stamp onto this and cut it out, and we've also used the same paper to create our background, and on this one we've added a die cut just to finish it off really nicely. So there's so much different stuff that you can do with your stamps when you're making your cards or decorating your pages. So now with our stamps, our traditional stamp is a red rubber or sometimes grey rubber stamp on a wooden block. Now your wooden block was lovely to hang on to, you had a picture of the stamp there, they're great, but in recent years we've tended towards going towards more unmounted stamps, which are easier for storage and with your clear ones easier to see where you're stamping. So although these are just beautiful, they have gone a little bit out of vogue at the moment. Not that I would ever throw out any of my wooden mounted stamps because I just do love the look of them. But these days, as I said, a lot of the stamps that we use are unmounted, which is something like this. This is a red rubber one. We're just going to take the backing off, and this foam here will actually stick to our acrylic block, and then we're ready to stamp. Now that foam also gives it a bit of cushioning to help with getting a better imprint when you're stamping. And then we can take that off, either pop the backing back onto it or just pop it back onto an acetate or plastic sheet ready for storage. Now with storage of stamps, all stamps and ink pads need to be kept out of sunlight. Sunlight will degrade them, and even keeping them out of the light is a good idea. So popping them into a folder or a tin or something like that and making sure that they're stored in areas where they're not going to get hit by your sunlight. Okay, so with our clear stamps, we also they often come either individually or in sets. So this is a set of sentiments. The stamp can be pulled off the backing. And I'll just grab a smaller acrylic block. Just popped onto the block, it'll stick there. And then again, you can stamp with that. Now there's two different types of clear stamps. You can get some quite cheap ones that are made from silicone. You can stamp with them, but it doesn't give you as good a stamped image, and also they lose their stickiness on the back after they've been used a couple of times, which makes them a little bit harder to use. But they are cheaper to buy. Your dearer ones are made from a quality photopolymer, and this is something that was developed for the printing industry, and it's designed to transfer ink really well. So you get as good a stamped an image with a clear stamp as you do with most of your red rubber stamps. The other thing is that they're made with this sticky back finish, so they'll always stick to your acrylic block. If they start to lose their stick, they just need a little bit of an extra clean. Now, a basic clean for your stamp, I normally use just a kitchen sponge and just wipe my stamp, just a damp kitchen sponge, wipe my stamp across it. I don't recommend, so that's just dampened with water. I don't recommend using baby wipes or things, because sometimes the alcohols or the oils in those can be a bit damaging on your stamps. There are various brands of stamp cleaner, but you do need to make sure that the stamp cleaner is designed for the type of stamp that you're using. Some of them are just for rubber, some are just for clear, some will do both. There is some, like in particular the Stays On cleaner, that's designed for cleaning solvent-based inks, and it will actually degrade your clear stamps and actually damage them. So be a little bit careful that the cleaner you're using is designed for your stamps. Now, with your clear stamps, if they do start to lose their stickiness on the back, or they're building up a little bit of ink and you want to give them a clean, just get an old toothbrush and a bit of liquid soap, give them a bit of a scrub and rinse them under water, then lay them out on paper or a lint-free cloth to dry, and they'll come back beautifully sticky again. Unfortunately, they don't come back shiny and pristinely new again. They will pick up some colour as you use them, particularly if you're using them with the archival type inks. They will get stained, but this doesn't affect the quality of the stamp at all. In fact, sometimes it makes it a bit easier to see where you're stamping. So as long as you're actually cleaning it between using your different ink pads, the bit of staining is not going to affect the quality of how your stamp works, so don't worry about it. But do try and avoid getting ink on the backing part of the stamp, and we'll go into that when we talk about actually inking a stamp, because if you get that area stained, that then makes it harder to see where you're placing the stamp, and that's one of the advantages of a clear stamp. Okay, let's go over some of our basic ink types. So our main two types of inks is dye inks and pigment inks. So dye inks are a finer, quick drying ink suited to smoother surfaces of card, either glossy or matte, whereas your pigment inks are a thicker, slow drying ink that can handle a more textured card, but they won't dry on glossy. So it depends a little bit what you're going to do with your stamps as to what paper you're going to use, what ink pads you choose. Okay, so with the dye inks, we've got various brands, and I've just got a couple here today to show you. There's things like, Ranger makes things like the Wendy Vecchi blendable background stamp pads. They also do the Distress ink pads, and a lot of our companies come out with a smaller size or a larger size ink pad, so you have your choice. The smaller ones can be great for building up a collection of colours. It means you might be able to afford to purchase more colours, but a lot of us prefer the actual feel of using a bigger ink pad. So it's really just personal preference. Now, some of our companies, like the Ultranew, come out with a series of colours in a colour family. That way you know those colours are all going to go together. And with the Ultranew, a lot of their stamps are designed to have multiple layers, and so they've designed the inks to work with that. Other ink pads, like the Catherine Pooler ones, these is, again, a lot of the colours come in the small size as well as a larger size. These ones, again, dye ink, quick drying, they give a great stamped image, and you've also find that you'll get light, medium and dark, richer tones in most of the colours, which again helps to take the guesswork out of what colours to put together. Now, our other type of dye ink is our permanent dye inks. So again, many companies have these, the Ultranew, Catherine Pooler, the Ranger Archival. All of these ones will dry to a waterproof finish. That means you can do background effects and water painting over the top of them. So you have water soluble, and in some cases actually like the Distress ones and the Catherine Poolers, water reactive inks, that when you add water over them, you'll get background effects, compared with your permanent inks that won't move when you put water on them. And so you can use the two together, one to keep your image crisp and one to create your background effects. The other type of dye ink is a Kaleidocolor, and we'll use this one in our next video. And with the Kaleidocolors, you can actually, they're multicoloured ink pad, you can push them together and make it into a stamp pad for stamping, or you can leave them apart and do more background effects with them. And they come in quite a range of colours. Again, a specialty ink pad in the dies is your Ranger Distress Oxide. So these come in the same colours as the Distress pads, but they have an added element. They're a hybrid ink, and as you put water on and then heat them, this oxidation happens, which gives you great distress looks and great background effects. Moving on to our pigment inks. Now our pigment inks, we have several ones like VersaFine Clear that are great for doing your outlines. They again dry to a waterproof finish, so you can watercolour over the top of them, but remember they don't dry on glossy card, only on your matte card surfaces. In pigment inks you also get colours, so we have things like the VersaMagic chalk inks, which again come in a larger size and a smaller size. These ones and the Colourbox fluid chalk inks actually have chalk in the ink, so they dry to a very soft fresco sort of look to them. You can get straight colours in your pigment inks, which would be things like the Versacolor or the Colourbox, and they have cubes, or they have these petal points where you can pull it out to make an individual ink colour, or you can stamp over the whole lot for a multicoloured effect. But the other beautiful thing about pigment inks is this is where we find things like white and all of our metallics. So things like your gold, your silvers, bronze, copper, metallic pinks and purples, they all come in pigment inks, not in dye ones. And they're great for some of our effects. Now let's go on to actually how to stamp. So I'm just going to take a little bit of our cotton blend cardstock. So cardstock you can stamp on lots of different sorts of cards. Basic white cardstock. I usually aim for a minimum of 200 GSM for my cards. 200 to 250 works really well. The cotton blend is a slightly creamy card. It's like has a high cotton content, so it's like a watercolour paper, but it's much smoother than a watercolour paper, which is more suited to those of us doing stamping where we want a smooth surface to stamp onto. There's also others like some brighter white inks, white cardstock, like your Nina Solar White, the Night Smooth, things like that, Satin Smooth, that will give you a very brilliant, bright look to your inks, whereas the cotton blend is going to be a little bit softer. The other type of cardstock that I often work on is a gloss card, which has, as you can see in the camera shot, quite a shine to it, and this will give you a postcard look effect to your stamps, your stamping in your images. These are coloured in with dye inks because, as I said, your pigment inks don't dry on the glossy card, or most of them don't. Working on the gloss card though is something that I'll cover in later DVDs. So let's do some basic stamping onto our cotton blend so that we can do some colouring onto it. So I'm going to pick up a stamp. Now a good habit to get into is to take your ink pad to your stamp. This way you're less likely to over ink the stamp. So you just tap across. Try and keep my fingers out of the way so that my cameraman can see what I'm doing. Tap across, and then we lay our stamp onto our page. Press down firmly over the whole stamp. Don't rock it from side to side. Just press down, and don't take your hands away, both hands away, and come back to it because you might knock it. If you're wanting to get to the other side and change hands, I'll make sure I'm hanging onto it firmly with that hand before I move this one. So press down, then hold your cardstock and lift straight up, and we'll get a really good image. Now I'm just going to add a few of the smaller flowers around that. With your smaller flowers and things, you might find that it is easier to take your stamp to your ink pad because it's a little bit hard to actually stamp over a tiny stamp. But do be aware, just tap it across. Don't ever press your stamp into your ink pad. All you do is waste ink. You get it on the block, which might then stamp edges onto the card. You get it on the backing area, and you may stain that area. And as I said, that can make it more difficult to see where you're stamping. So just a light tap. And particularly, some of the ink pads are quite firm, and you can tap a bit firmer. Some of them, like the Catherine Pullers and the Ancient Page inks, you can very, very gently tap on those, because otherwise you'll squish into them. And the chalk ones are the same with this, the VersaMagic and Colourbox chalk ones. Very soft, squishy ink pads, which give you a great inking, but don't overdo it. Just light taps. So now we'll stamp this on here, press down and lift up, ink again, stamp down, press down and lift straight up. Now sometimes you might find that some people have a bit of a shake to the hands, they might have a bit of a weakness in the hands or the wrists, or they might just find that they have trouble getting a good image on our cardstock. And this is where sometimes using something like something like our Misty stamping tool or a stamping platform. I think Fiskus has a stamp press, but some sort of a tool to help with your stamping can be really good. It's also a great idea, particularly I find I often have made my card, I've done all my lovely background colouring, and then I stamp the sentiment on, and that's when I muck up the inking. So using something like this means I can actually re-stamp it and it will come out in the same place. So I'm just cleaning my stamp, I'm going to lay it onto my card and work out where I would like to put it. Make sure I'm nice and straight. Now I can pick it up with my platform and then making sure the card is still sitting nice and neat there, I can ink up my stamp, close the lid and stamp away. Pressing down, and this is when I go, oh no, I didn't ink the stamp properly. So what we can do, just check that our card is still in the same place, ink up our stamp again. The other thing where these are great is if you're making something like Christmas cards and you've got a lot to make, you can just leave your stamp in the same position, take your card, and look at that. Perfect image. So I could just take that bit of card out, put a fresh bit of card in, ink up our stamp again, and stamp it in the same place. So for repetitive stamping, for things like invitations, Christmas cards, that sort of thing, these sort of tools are fabulous. Now I'm just going to clean that stamp with my sponge, take it off, and I can pop that to one side. And then let's do some colouring. So our colouring, as I said, our colouring can be done with things that you've already got at home. Things like your coloured pencils, your textures, that sort of thing can all be used. So let's have a go with some coloured pencils. Now I can get a coloured pencil and just do one colour of pencil, colouring it lightly to start with, and then going over it a little bit stronger to create some deeper colours to it. I'm just going to go medium pressure to blend the two in together and back to very light. So even with one colour we can get a blended look. We can put down several colours. So I'm going to blend my medium colour in with that. And I'm going to put a deeper colour in. And then I'm going to go in reverse. Now the ones I'm using here are the Prismacolor pencils, which are quite a good quality art pencil. They have a great waxy finish to them. Your Derwents, your Faber-Castells all do lovely quality pencils, but you can just use any coloured pencil you've got. You will find though that with more of your art pencils you'll get a better result because they've got more pigment in them. But certainly you can use whatever you can lay your hands on and you can colour with it. So let's just grab our light one, I'm going to blend it in, and I'm actually going to go over the top of all of them just to create a lovely finished blended effect. So that's our coloured pencils. Now similar with textures, so again you can use your normal textures. The ones I've got here are a Tombow marker. They've got a brush type nib on one end and a solid nib on the other end, which you could use for doing writing, or you can use it for inking on your stamp, which I'll show you soon. So we can again just colour with one colour, and then we can actually overlap that, put some extra colour into some areas to create a blended look. We can ink up with several colours. So I'm going to ink up with the lighter colour. Then I'm going to come in with my deeper colour. I'll just get rid of a few bits and pieces here. Come in with a deeper colour and add some colour to the base. And then I'm actually going to go back to the lighter colour and use that for blending. So I'm going over where that dark colour meets the lighter one. Then I can just wipe my brush on my scrap paper till it goes back to the soft pink. Blend that edge again, wipe my brush clear, blend again, until we end up with it blended into that soft colour. So that's just your normal textures. You can also get a, actually I should show this, you can also get a blending texture with some brands. So let's just add in some dark again and a bit of light. And then I'm just going to use my clear blender to go between the two. again, now I've now created another edge there, so I'll clean that off and I can go between those two bits and create a blending. So either blending just with the markers themselves or using a clear blender, again, you can get a fantastic effect. So that's just some of the things you would normally have at home. Now, a lot of us also have some watercolour pencils at home, so we're going to do a little bit with those as well. Now, when I'm doing any watercolouring, I like to work with a water brush. Now, the brand I use is the Pentel. There are several brands. These are a nice one that are very easy to work with. You actually just screw the bottom off, pop it under a tap, dripping tap, or use a pipette just to add the water into the barrel of it. Pop it back together again. And I usually like to give it a little bit of a squeeze and just run it along my hand until I can feel that it's a bit damp, and then I know the water's flowing. Now, you can just use a paintbrush just dipped into water, but that means you've got an open jar of water on your table that can get knocked over. It's also not as portable. But also I find with these, I get a more even flow of water. Now, the 4 sizes in this brand gives you your fine, a medium, a broad, and a flat. And the flat is actually rounded like a filbert on the end. So your broad and your filbert ones are for laying down water for more watercolour paint effects, and also for doing backgrounds. For your basic painting, I usually stick to the fine and the medium. And for most people getting started, I recommend the medium because this is the most versatile one to work with. So what we're going to do is just use some watercolour pencils. Now, with these, you can just colour on your petal. I do find that myself, I often tend to get marks from the pencils by doing it this way, but you can just colour onto the paper and then use your water brush to blend them. Okay, or you can actually colour the pencils onto a bit of scrap paper and work from that. I have a very bad habit of actually working directly from the pencil itself, which I've been told can actually make your pencils go a little bit hard. I haven't had that problem with mine, but a better habit is to probably get used to colouring onto your scrap. So I'm just going to use that colour and wash it out. Now, with watercolour, any sort of watercolouring, if I clean my brush, and because I'm working on this high cotton content paper that's not going to ball or pill when I'm doing watercolour effects, I can actually use my brush and just move the colour away. So if I want an area darker, I grab colour and I drag it with me. If I want it lighter, I just push it away. Now, this also works a bit if you go outside your lines. Get your brush nice and clean, and we can actually then just work that colour back into our design. And you notice I'm just cleaning, each time I push that ink around, I'm just cleaning off on my scrap until we've cleaned that card up. However, if we found that we'd put too much, we had gone out of our lines and we'd made a bit of a mistake and it wasn't cleaning up well, we just add a shadow in there, make it a background effect. Often some of the best things that you do in stamping where think you've made mistakes can turn out to be a great thing that you wish you could remember how you did it so you can do it again. So don't be too stressed if you make a mistake, just turn it into something else. We often say there's no mistakes in stamping, there's just new creative opportunities. So don't stress too much over your colouring and your stamping, because you can usually turn out something really pretty even when you think it's not going in the direction you wanted it to. So now again with this one where we've already blended the one colour out to dark to light, we can also add another deeper colour in there and just blend over those two till they blend together. So doing your colouring is actually really easy. It's really relaxing and it's great to do. A couple of other things you can do, we can grab an acrylic block, and with these textures, using the bullet end though, this time not the brush end, colour it onto a bit of an old plate or acrylic block. We pick that up with our water brush and we've made it, our texture, into a watercolour paint. Just going to move that away and create light and dark there. We can come in with a bit more and just deepen off that end. Again, we can do our highlights and our shades. Another thing we can use is products around watercolour crayons, watercolour pastels. These ones are the Ink Tense. the Inktense block, so it's a very, very pigmented block. So we can use that to do our painting with. I'm just going to blend out over a couple of petals there. I'm going to pick up some of the orange. Just going to blend that out to the edge of the petals. And notice I keep moving my card around, so I'm always working at an angle that's comfortable for me. And I'm going to blend those two colours together. And now just using my fine brush, I'm going to pick up some of that red. So this is the advantage sometimes of using a fine brush, is that you can get into smaller areas. But it means with the two brushes, I've got one for applying colour and one for blending. And I'm not wasting that colour as I go between the two. But that's a luxury. It's not an essential, but it can be nice sometimes to work with two. But you certainly don't have to. As you saw with me cleaning the brush when I was doing between the orange and the yellow, you can actually just use the one brush and just clean it between colours. But I often like to use the two. Okay, so that's some basic watercolouring there. Now we're just going to add a little bit of ink around the edge of our card. And for this I like to use a big brush. Oh, actually we're going to add a little stamped image around it as well. So this is the Sketch Swell stamp that if you're buying our starter pack, this little stamp comes in the set. And it's great for doing borders and backgrounds. So this is where to show you that you don't always have to use the whole stamp. So I'm just going to ink it up on my stamp pad, taking my stamp pad to my stamp, and we're just going to go around our card. And just use different parts of the stamp to create a lovely background or border effect. Okay, and another thing that we can do, as I said, is shading around a card. Now this can be done with your dye inks or your pigment inks. I'm just going to grab a big brush for doing this. Just pick up a little bit of ink on the end of the brush, and the easiest way to start off with is just with circles. And that'll create a lovely soft shaded effect. I'm going to go over this corner here where there's no stamping so you can see it really well. So just circles on your scrap paper first and then blend in onto your card. Now if you've got a bit more confidence in this and you're wanting it a little bit stronger, you can actually wiggle over the card instead. But whenever you're shading into the card, I would go back to the circles so that you keep it lovely and soft. So that's a lovely way of just finishing off your cards by adding that around them. Now another thing that we can do with our marker pens, we can do things like colouring our stamps directly. We can do different effects with our Kaleido pads, but these are things I'm going to cover in a second part to this getting started in stamping. This is probably enough to take in for one go, so thank you for joining us for part 1 of getting started in stamping. We will have a part 2 that's going to follow on with some other techniques, and below this video we'll add a link for you to be able to find part 2 when you're wanting to watch it. So thank you for joining me for part 1 of getting started in stamping, and I'll join you soon for part 2.